Hi, I'm your host, Brittney Gallagher, in a place from our not so distant past, and I'm joined by.
I'm Phil Libin. Welcome to this episode of Degrees of Freedom, making the out of office world.
Last time, we continued to dive into how trust is changing in this out of office world. And another thing that's changing, and we've touched on this quite a bit already, is opportunity. We've talked about being able to hire from anywhere, but another type of opportunity is really flexibility and having the flexibility and the freedom to not have to commute, to not have that traditional 9 to 5 schedule. Phil, since you've switched to a fully distributed company, how have you seen that change for your people who work from laptops?
I got to tell you, the office worked great for me because we opened it close to where I was living, and I can afford to live pretty close by, so the commute wasn't actually that bad. And everyone was kind of generally nice and respectful to me when I showed up. So it's just like an important part. I got positive affirmation every day that I went there, and we set it up to kind of work around my schedule anyway. And yeah, I don't see what was wrong with it. I kind of can't wait to go back to that environment.
What
Um,
about what about for your people who work from laptops though, not just you?
oh yeah, it was terrible for everyone else. That's the part that I was forgetting. Yeah, I think offices are set up to work well for a pretty narrow range of people. Basically, the guys running it, and it was usually guys back then. And For everyone else, it was pretty terrible. It was long commutes and all sorts of politics, and it only worked for people that could structure their lives to be away from their friends and family and homes for the vast majority of their waking hours every week. So yeah, once you get rid of that, once you get rid of this thing that kept everyone, that severely constrained everyone's options, you have a life and work with far more flexibility. And far more flexibility, if you do it right, translates to far more opportunity, far more fairness, far more inclusion. It's just a much more humane way to work. In this episode, we're joined again by Lydia Jett of the SoftBank Vision Fund, who's talking about what the out of office world is like for investment and what kind of opportunities it presents.
And later in this episode, I'm joined by Judi Lund, who started a family because she had the flexibility and the freedom of working out of the office. But first, here's Phil and Lydia.
What do you think? One of the, I think, big structural problems with tech investment for years has been and still is that it's extremely unevenly distributed, and not just in terms of the people who get investment at kind of an early stage, but also like who succeeds in tech companies. And it really takes someone who traditionally doesn't have much of a life outside of work and show up for long hours of time in a central office, doesn't have responsibilities for, too many other people in their lives. Um, and that's been something that I think you and a lot of people in the industry have been trying to change, have been trying to fight against. How has this shift affected it? I know in many ways, I think women and people who were traditionally disadvantaged have done actually significantly worse because of COVID, because so much of the responsibility fell on them. On the other hand, maybe current work environments are more flexible. I don't know. Where do you think all of this nets out in terms of access to a meaningful job to as many people as possible?
Yeah, so yes, 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 and it's bigger and broader than that. It's pretty easy to define it as women because we have additional layers of responsibility at home. But I'd broaden it to say introverts. There's a lot of different types of people who haven't been as successful in historical workforces because of whatever communication styles were deployed or whatever way they presented. I kind of laugh because I've been working for 20 years and I spent the vast majority of those 20 years trying to pretend I wasn't a woman. And, I kind of mean that sincerely. When I got engaged 15 years ago, I remember the head of my firm asking if my husband would allow me to work. And so I think there's a lot of preconceived notions about what it looks like to be successful in an organization, to get to the top of an organization. And I think the pandemic has been a great leveler to some degree of some of it. I had a colleague yesterday say to me, I don't want to go back to an office because I'm an introvert and working from home just works better for me. And I would have never known he was an introvert because he gets just as much airtime as everybody else because the extroverts aren't hanging around my desk. And so Yes, I mean, I specifically love to talk about women. I love to talk about the conversations I'm having all of the time with women who we all like to try and forget the first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic when we were juggling jobs that had gotten more stressful, plus no childcare, or whatever personal dynamics you had at home. But I think there have been so many humanizing aspects of this pandemic, and that includes the fact that 2 years ago it wasn't okay if a child showed up in a conference call or a Zoom screen, and now it's okay. And it's more than okay. When my male colleagues have kids show up on the calls, we all celebrate it and we laugh and we feel like we understand them and their home life better. It's more authentic, it's more personal. And so it's just been this breaking down of a wall between the work and the personal life that has always stood, that has been really delightful to watch. So, I think women specifically with young kids, I'll speak for myself, I'll speak only for a couple other women I've spoken to about this. The ability to not have to keep up with the travel, the ability to be able to run down the street and do something at your child's school and be right back to work without big commutes. The ability, I was talking to a colleague of mine, a male colleague of mine, who said, I had no idea how hard it was to be a woman in this job because I don't even blow dry my hair in the morning. I think all of these things are changing for the better. And I hope, my big hope, as the world starts to revert to a more post-COVID state, is that we don't leave it all behind. We don't all rush back to what it used to look like.
So how do we lock it in? How do we lock in the gains and continue to build on them instead of rushing back?
Yeah, I think I'm reflecting on my own organization, because the individuals who are in a position to set policy do look like the gray-haired people at the top of the organization who want the old world back. They want it the way it was. They see value in it. And I think for anyone in any position of power, it's our job to speak up and suggest that an alternative might work as well. And so, I spend a lot of time questioning assumptions, questioning whether in fact it is better for the culture for us all to be together, whether it's better to have meetings in person, whether we need to mandate time in the office. I think if we leave those decisions to the senior members of our organization, those decisions might unfold differently than the breadth of the organization might want. But that said, in my entire career, I've never seen a moment in time where workers are more empowered than they are right now in terms of a really tight economy with a lot of remote work opportunities. And so you have an opportunity to speak with your feet as well. And I think leaders of organizations will see that. So, like anything else, change demands people speaking up for it. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to communicate why the changes we're asking for, or the sameness we're asking for, makes sense for the business. And I think there's a lot of good validation of why that makes sense today. We've had long enough to test it out, a lot of good evidence to support it.
Leaning into the advantages of the new way of doing things is probably the best way to kind of counter program that narrative. So there's a very understandable rush to get back to what used to work for some people, especially if those are the people that are making the decisions. But there's been so many obvious advantages and obvious gains. And what we try to do is really focus on those and kind of say, some things are harder, but that difficulty is so worth it because of the superpowers, because of the advantages. And because frankly, a lot of what we used to do in the past, it's just crazy. Like when you look at it now, waking up at, 5 a.m. so you can show up at work, beating rush hour traffic and sit there for 12 hours. Like that is a pathological way to live. And if you're really, if someone's really into that and that's what you want to do, okay, that's weird, but sure. But asking, I'm never going to ask people to do that again. I'm never going to do that.
That was Lydia Jett reminding us, like with all great change, we have to continue to fight to keep this out-of-office world full of opportunity for everyone. Of course, this out-of-office world has already provided a lot of opportunity to families, working mothers, caregivers, and many others who can't follow that traditional 9-to-5 in an office plus a commute. Up next, I'm joined by Judi Lund, a new mom and full-time out-of-office worker in the field of real estate technology, talking about how being distributed helped her decide to start a family. In this episode, we're phrasing this a bit as a redistribution of opportunity. And how has working distributedly changed your life?
Well, it definitely affected my family planning. So I had a pandemic baby, and I wouldn't have really thought to try to start the process had we not been work from home. It was something that I knew I wanted to do, but I had always pictured it kind of later down the road after other things had got more figured out and aligned to allow space for a family.
Mhm.
But it felt like the world kind of did that for us when we all went work from home and remote.
So did the company you work for decide for you to continue to work distributedly or remotely?
For my role, yes.
So at what point during the pandemic did you know that you wouldn't actually have to go back?
There was never a guarantee of you'll never have to come back to the
Mhm.
office. They'll say things like for the foreseeable future, but
Mhm.
no promises. And certainly earlier on, when everyone was thinking, oh, 2 weeks to flatten the curve,
Yeah.
this was not how we imagined it.
Mhm.
And I think that whole summer of 2020 was very, that's when I got pregnant, and it wasn't under the understanding that this was a forever thing. It was just like, this suits being pregnant and having a baby. So if I can kind of like combine this with the mat leave, I
Mhm.
think that would work better. But I thought I would have to go back to the office when she was an infant or toddler. So this has been kind of a surprise, because being able to extend the distributed work changes what I'm able to do as a mom. So for me personally, it was my goal to nurse to breastfeed for the first year.
Mhm.
And I don't know how feasible that would have been in the office, even though there's all these lovely laws where they have to let you pump and all this. It's not conducive to like a production based job where you have to just get a bunch done as soon as it's ready to be done. You're kind of on the spot, and then there's more coming in for each day. So if you're taking time to go to a different room and pump, and then you have to like clean everything, so being able to do it at home, I can do a lot of that and multitask while I'm working, which would not have been an option in the office at all.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's definitely helped me stick to that goal, which is super important right now, because for me, that's the only way I can provide like a layer of protection for my baby, because I'm vaxxed. So it all goes through the breast milk. So I feel better about her having some antibodies.
That was Judi Lund on her decision to start a family because she was able to work out of the office. And it's pretty clear that this desire for flexibility is higher for working moms, and even a deciding factor for many in starting families. And flexibility feels like a gateway to a more diverse workplace. And the Future Forum Pulse report seen here found that working mothers really want location flexibility, or really actually just more degrees of freedom. And also, this desire for flexibility remains highest in underrepresented groups, which I don't necessarily think comes as a surprise. But even so, across all groups, it's still very high. So, Phil, one of the things that Lydia mentions is introverts, and I'm not really sure that that's maybe the right way of phrasing it, but certainly a lot of people, just based on their personality, never really thrived in a full-time office world. And there's examples, are there any examples actually that you've noticed switching to being fully distributed where you've seen, people maybe who didn't expect like perform better than they did in the previous world?
Yeah, me. But lots of people, and I think introverts is probably not the perfect way to say it, but it's not a bad first approximation of what's actually happening. And first approximation is exactly the kind of thing an introvert would say. It's people who there's people who gain a lot of energy from constantly being around others and who are very good and comfortable socially, and then there's those of us who aren't. And the office culture was really set up, really the in-person culture, whether that's high school or the office or jail. It's really set up for people who are good in that kind of environment, and that's some people, but not all of us. And when you do things asynchronously, when you do things in a distributed way, when you get together in person sometimes, but when you get together, it's meaningful and you're not just making small talk. I think it's just better for everyone. So lots of examples over the past couple of years of engineers and designers and marketing people and finance people that I'm just seeing kind of a flourishing of productivity, people who weren't necessarily doing as well before.
Yeah, I think one example you'd mentioned to me a while back was like a design session and having a, through Figma, and instead of like in a conference room together and having people design through Figma. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we used to do product design, at Evernote, and before we would all, we'd cram into a room and we'd stick colored sticky notes up on, all over the walls, write down features and move them and whatever. And it was just kind of a scrum. In fact, we called it Shark Week. We called the process Shark Week. I don't know why. Just like Shark Week. And so during Shark Week, we would get together in the room in these big tanks and yell at each other and disagree and put stickers and take them off and whatever. And some people were really good at that and other people weren't. And then when we went fully distributed, we couldn't do that anymore. And at first I was like, oh man, how are we ever going to design anything again? We can't be in the same room yelling at each other with stickies. And so we wound up having to do it in Figma, and it was different. And it wasn't as good for the first 20 minutes. And then it got radically better, and then it stayed radically better. And then one of the things I was seeing was even after the first few sessions was that, I was getting a lot of creativity and productivity from people that I wasn't used to getting a lot of creativity and productivity before. And I realized that, like, in the old way of doing things, I was the problem, because the only people that thrived in the previous way were people who were comfortable, like, shouting down the CEO, interrupting and saying, no, actually, let's put this here, which was thankfully a lot of people, but not everyone. And also, it was only people who were comfortable having a thought and immediately blurting it out of their mouths. And there's lots of people who are really quite talented who aren't comfortable having a thought and immediately blurting it out of their mouth. They would like to think about it for a few minutes, sometimes maybe 20 minutes, sometimes maybe a day or two. And they don't get a chance to do that with a real-time synchronous culture, at least a design culture, the way we used to have it. And now they did. Now everyone could be a little bit more meditative and think about it a little bit better. So it was maybe slightly less fun in the beginning for people who liked to get in there, but it was far more productive for everyone, and it became its own kind of fun. So very quickly, like, I am never going back to the old way of designing things because it was inferior to the new way of doing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And another theme of that is live every week like it's Shark Week.
Live every week like it's Shark Week, because one week it will be.
1 week a year it will be.
And we will be prepared. Yeah.
It's about that time of year. In this series, we continue to explore how this redistribution of opportunity is changing the world.
Big thanks to Lydia and Judi for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Degrees of Freedom, Making the Out-of-Office World.
I'm Brittney Gallagher.
And I'm Libin.